Step out, Mr. Bundy. What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. Oh, it's an indictment, all right. Why don't you read it to me? You're up for election, aren't you? You told him you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go. Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged. Indictment. Understand that Theodore Robert Bundy, on the 15th day of January, 1978, in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Lisa Levy, from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy. My chance to talk to the press. Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute. I'll plead not guilty right now. And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be... Well, listen. I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now. All right? We got a court order that there won't be any press interviews. Sure there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged, you're not. Okay. The captain will read you. I'll be heard.
It starts with charm, the kind that doesn't arrive loudly, but seeps in, calm, measured, articulate. They know how to pronounce your name in just the right way. They know how to mirror your tone, your pace, your worries. Not because they care, but because they've studied the shape of concern, the tone of empathy, the cadence of safety. Their language, like everything else, is a performance. Narcissistic killers don't confess. They narrate, they reframe, they stage. A narcissist doesn't simply admit what they've done. They repackage it as something bigger, a tragedy, a lesson, a misunderstood love story. In their eyes, their pain eclipses everyone else's, including the victims. And in the retelling, they never stand alone in the spotlight. There's always someone else to blame. The police, the parents, the world, you. Look what you made me do. It's not just a pop lyric. It's a weaponized phrase, soaked in displaced guilt and the need to rewrite history. The narcissist knows exactly how language can dilute an atrocity. If the story can be told well enough, maybe the facts will start to blur. Maybe the audience will feel sorry for them. Maybe the court will hesitate. Maybe someone, somewhere, will call them human, because that's what they fear most, not being punished, being forgotten. And so, they speak. Even in courtrooms, especially in interrogations, you can feel the seduction of their own voice as it leaves their mouth. Every sentence polished, every pause deliberate. They choose words like mirrors, not to reflect the truth, but to reshape how they're seen. I was just trying to help. She misunderstood. You have no idea what I've been through. I never meant to hurt anyone. But what kind of person needs a tragedy to feel seen? That question leads us deeper, past the apologies, past the poetic lies, into the psychology of language as armor, and the terrifying need to feel exceptional, even when drowning in guilt. Not all killers speak, but when narcissists do, they want the last word to sound like a eulogy, for themselves. But what happens when that language, so carefully crafted, so emotionally rehearsed, begins to fall apart? What happens when the mask slips? Why do they speak in circles? Why can't they answer a simple question without dressing it in metaphor, memory, or misplaced emotion? It's because the truth, in its rawest form, does not serve them. For the narcissistic killer, the truth is too blunt, too final. It doesn't allow for interpretation, and interpretation is their favorite escape route. So instead of offering clarity, they create confusion. Instead of details, they give performance. Instead of remorse, they offer self-pity, dressed up as wisdom. You don't understand what I've suffered. I tried to stop, but no one helped me. I'm not like the others. I felt something. The narcissist rarely denies the act outright. Not forever. Instead, they wrap it in justification. Layer after layer, each detail becomes a weapon, or a wound, whichever gets them more sympathy. They build myths around themselves. Childhood pain, broken hearts, impossible pressure. These things may be true, but truth in their hands is never sacred. It's leverage. Pain becomes currency, and their suffering is always somehow more vivid, more cinematic, more deserving of empathy than the destruction they've left behind. It's not denial of guilt. It's the redirection of spotlight. Their victims vanish into the background, unnamed, unfelt, nearly forgotten, while the killer tells you what they felt, what they feared, what they endured. This is not confession. This is curation. In their version of events, even the most brutal crimes are explained with a kind of poetic restraint. And when asked why they did it, the response is rarely an answer. It's a scene, a flashback, a sigh, a story so long and winding you almost forget what the question was. That's the point. In these monologues, the narcissist is both victim and hero. What they did becomes secondary to how they felt doing it. It's not about the act, it's about the audience. But what happens when the audience stops clapping? What happens when the language that once protected them begins to sound hollow, and even the mirror stops reflecting what they want to see? What does a narcissist do when the applause dies? They change the act. When the spotlight grows dim, they don't retreat into silence. They escalate.
You told him there you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
They perform louder, grander, stranger, because to them, silence isn't peace, it's death. Narcissistic. Killers are not satisfied by the act itself, not fully. The true high comes from how the act is received. Do you fear them, admire them, despise them in just the right amount? To a narcissist, infamy is almost as intoxicating as praise. Maybe more, because infamy lasts. They don't just want to be remembered, they want to be remembered vividly. Every word quoted, every glance analyzed, every twisted detail studied, retold, mythologized. Their language, like their violence, is designed for legacy. You should have seen the look in her eyes. I left it there on purpose. I wanted them to find it. They'll never forget me now. That's not remorse. That's authorship. Some leave behind carefully chosen souvenirs, not just for themselves, but for you. Each one placed like a breadcrumb for the public. A bloody note, a missing shoe, a body positioned just so. These are not signs of madness, not entirely. They are statements. Look, remember, talk about me. And if that doesn't work, they talk about themselves in interviews, in letters, in cold, self-directed monologues from behind bulletproof glass. Even in confession, they seek control of the narrative. But beneath that hunger for attention is a fear they rarely voice. A fear more unsettling than guilt, more potent than justice. The fear of becoming ordinary. What happens when no one is watching anymore? What happens when even their name begins to fade? And what do? When the only person left to impress is themselves? When a narcissist confesses, is it truth or theater? Because what looks like vulnerability might be a rehearsed monologue. What sounds like guilt could be a calculated pause. Tears aren't always grief. Sometimes they're strategy. In the language of a narcissistic killer, I'm sorry doesn't always mean remorse. Sometimes it means, I want you to lower your guard. I want to look good on paper. I want to control how you remember me. There's a reason some of the most unsettling confessions feel almost scripted. The voice calm, the eyes dry, the rhythm steady, almost too steady. It isn't that they don't know what they've done. It's that they want to be the one who defines it. It wasn't personal. I blacked out. It had to be done. You wouldn't understand. They speak like narrators, not suspects. Detached, omniscient, as if they're watching themselves from a distance, crafting the perfect, tragic anti-hero arc. And the more they talk, the more the lines blur. Is this a confession or a screenplay? But here's the real question. If they're performing, who's the audience? Is it the detective in the room, the media, themselves? Or is it you? And as you listen, fascinated, horrified, eyes locked to the screen, have you unknowingly taken your seat in the theater? What if the real mask wasn't the one they wore during the act, but the one they wore every day before it? A narcissist doesn't just blend in. They excel, they charm, they curate. Before the headlines, they're often the neighbor who always waved, the volunteer at the charity fundraiser, the smiling face in family photos, the one who seemed so normal, even admirable. But normal is a stage too, because narcissistic killers don't build personalities, they build personas. And a persona doesn't have to be real, it just has to be believable. That's why their arrest can feel like whiplash. A community stunned, co-workers shaking their heads. He was the last person you'd suspect. Of course he was. That's how the story works. It's not just about power or attention. It's about image, maintaining control not only over how they live, but over how they are remembered. The narcissist's obsession with legacy doesn't end with the act. In some ways, the act is a vehicle for legacy. The need to leave something behind. A message, a mystery, a version of themselves that outlives them, and that leaves us with a question more disturbing than the crime itself. What if the killing wasn't the climax, but the introduction? Most people flee a crime scene. Some narcissists revisit it, not with footprints, but with fingerprints on the narrative. They follow the news, call in false tips. Sometimes they join the search party, stand just close enough to the center, without ever stepping into the light. Why? Because for the narcissist, the aftermath is still performance. They don't just want to be feared, they want to be known, even if only by the people they've destroyed. Look what you made me do. That's not just a phrase, it's a script. A way to frame the violence as inevitable, deserved, even poetic. Some leave behind symbolic clues, others write anonymous letters to the press. A few can't resist the camera. They crave the chaos they cause because in that storm, all eyes are on them again. They don't fear being caught as much as they fear being forgotten. And this isn't always about returning physically. Sometimes, it's psychological. They insert themselves into memorials, conversations, comment sections. They want to shape the memory of the crime, to whisper into the timeline long after the act is done. Which leads to the most disturbing realization of all. What if they never really left? What if the narcissist doesn't disappear, but dissolves back into the crowd? The act is over. The cameras fade. But for the narcissistic offender, the spotlight never dims. It simply shifts. When most see prison as the end of the story, the narcissist sees it as a new stage. From behind bars, many reshape their identities, not through remorse, but through reinvention. They write memoirs, send out manifestos. Some even become pen pals with admirers. And not just strangers, therapists, journalists, even academics get drawn into the performance. Why? Because the narcissist's obsession with control doesn't end with capture, it just evolves. Now, the currency isn't freedom, it's narrative. They want to control how they're remembered, paint themselves as misunderstood geniuses, tragic anti-heroes, or spiritual converts. And sometimes, the world listens. He was just a tortured mind. She had a terrible childhood. He's so articulate. It's hard to believe he did that. These aren't just comments. They're mirrors, reflecting the narcissist's crafted persona back at them. They feed off it. Notoriety is still attention, and attention is still power. It's why some orchestrate interviews years later. Why others sue filmmakers over their portrayals. Why, in the silence of their cells, they still fantasize about the version of them the world consumes. So we must ask, how do you sentence someone who never stops performing? And more importantly, what happens when society starts to believe the character they've become? It's one of the most chilling lines in the vocabulary of narcissistic violence. Look what you made me do. At first glance, it might sound like frustration, a deflection, even a plea. But underneath, it's a weapon, disguised as dialogue. This phrase, and ones like it, form the core language of narcissistic offenders, a language built on blame, distortion, and reversal. They don't just harm, they reframe. The victim becomes the instigator, the killer, the reactor, the act of violence, not a choice, but a forced hand. If she hadn't lied to me, if they didn't push me away, you don't know what they were really like. It's storytelling with a scalpel, cutting out any trace of accountability. But what's more disturbing is how often this narrative works. In courtrooms, jurors hear about the narcissist's pain, their abandonment, their brilliance, the tragedy of their misunderstood genius. In interviews, they smirk, speak calmly, point to their trauma or their intellect, and sometimes the audience nods along. Because charisma, when paired with victimhood, can disarm, and the phrase, "look what you made me do," becomes more than deflection. It becomes a spell, a way to enchant sympathy, to rewrite guilt, to erase the victim from their own story. So here's the question. How do we protect truth in a world where charm can masquerade as remorse? And more hauntingly, when the killer tells you their version, do you feel disturbed, or do you feel compelled to understand? Once the crime is committed and the courtroom falls silent, most stories are supposed to end. But with narcissistic offenders, that's often where the story begins again. Because for them, silence isn't closure. It's a stage. A narcissist doesn't just crave power, they crave immortality. And in the vacuum left by the crime, they begin to rebuild. With memoirs, phone calls from prison, paintings, letters to journalists, cryptic interviews that circle around confession without ever landing. They craft mythologies, not to explain the crime, but to expand their relevance. Take note, some of the most infamous criminals in history have become household names, not because of what they did, but because of how they told it afterward. In the narcissist's mind, notoriety is currency, and every whisper, every repost, every tabloid headline is a form of applause. They speak in riddles. They play with ambiguity. They drip feed just enough truth to stay relevant, and the media, hungry for the next angle, often obliges. So ask yourself, when we give them the mic, who are we really listening to? The truth or the performance? Because here's the most chilling part. In some cases, the narcissist doesn't even need to speak anymore. Their legend carries forward on its own. Their handwriting becomes an artifact. Their belongings, collectibles, their story, an obsession. And the echo chamber they built? It outlives the scream. In the quiet aftermath, long after the courtroom, the headlines, and the last cell door has closed, something unexpected can happen. The narcissistic killer begins to evolve, not away from the crime, but deeper into the belief that it was never wrong to begin with. This isn't just denial, it's rewriting the moral code to place themselves at the center of it. The God complex is not loud or theatrical. It whispers, it rationalizes, it reshapes the world around them until they are no longer the villain, but the misunderstood architect of justice, or fate, or divine punishment. I had to do it. They needed to learn. They left me no choice. And in the privacy of their mind, they are no longer just human. They are chosen. This internal rewrite can become so complete, so insulated from reality, that the narcissist begins to live in a private mythology, where every action, no matter how cruel, is justified by purpose. But here's what makes it truly chilling. They often become calm, collected, even gentle, because they believe they're finally in alignment with the truth of who they are. The rage has a reason now. The harm becomes destiny. They are no longer simply trying to be loved. They are trying to be worshipped, and whether anyone believes them is no longer the point, because they believe themselves. And that is where danger regenerates. Because someone who believes their violence is sacred won't be stopped by logic, remorse, or time. They will find a new way, a new audience, a new script. And if we don't understand the language, if we miss the signs, we may see it too late. What if the most terrifying thing about a narcissistic killer isn't the crime they committed, but the belief system they left behind?